our academic and staff assistance program. Today, we'll be presenting on increasing wellness with rest and providing tools to improve our quality of sleep. So if there are questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. And then at the end, we'll go ahead and address those questions. Veronica Franco is our practicum clinician, and she's here with us today, and she'll be helping with that. Any questions that I do not get to, I will definitely follow up with those with an email. And if you come up with questions after the presentation, always feel free to email me directly. So we'll go ahead and jump forward now to today's presentation. So I wanted to talk about the common issue of sleep. The CDC says this is now a national epidemic. 40 million Americans suffer from over 70 different sleep disorders. And 35% of adults regularly get less than 7 hours of sleep per night. And research shows that African Americans and other minority groups sleep even less than that. And we've also seen a 15% increase in prescriptions for sleep medications since the beginning of the pandemic. So this has been a significant concern. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how to manage some of these. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So before we go there, I wanted to talk a little bit and just have a moment of reflection of how your sleep has been impacted by the pandemic. Some people have said that they have been doing much better. They get more breaks or more interactions with people that they live with. There are people who maybe were commuting who now get to sleep in. So some people maybe have benefited in some ways, but others have been really affected by the shelter in place, which has caused less regular sleep schedules, more naps, and also an increased anxiety, which of course impacts sleep, and more attention to the news and social media, given the various pandemics that we're experiencing right now. So healthy adults are built for about 16 hours of wakefulness. And so that averages around 8 hours of sleep per night. But there are some people that can function really well with no sleepiness or drowsiness with as little as 6 hours. Some can't perform at their peak unless they've slept 10 hours. So definitely 8 is the average, but this varies person to person. And also there's a misconception that we need less sleep as we get older. We don't actually need less sleep, but just sleep tends to decline with age. And that has to do with just the production of our hormones. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. So what is healthy sleep? So we've all heard of REM sleep. This is one of the 4 stages of sleep that our body needs to really get deep rest. And adults ideally want to spend around 20 to 25% of their time sleeping in REM, which is about 1.5 to 2 hours if you sleep about 8 hours of sleep. This is the time when we get to mentally restore ourselves. This is when we are able to regulate our mood. This is when our brain converts short-term memories into long-term ones. And this is when most vivid dreams occur. So another question I get is about nightmares, because nightmares actually do happen in REM sleep, but of course has a different impact on us. And when we are experiencing nightmares during REM sleep, we of course don't get the same amount of restful sleep. And the #1 cause of nightmares is anxiety and stress. There are other causes, such as experiencing trauma or other upsetting events, having sleep deprivation or jet lag, also being ill and having a fever can impact nightmares. Also, there are side effects that we can experience from medications, especially sleeping pills, as well as alcohol consumption or even withdrawal from alcohol. And certain sleep disorders, like having difficulty sleeping difficulty breathing during sleep, which is Sleep apnea can cause nightmares, as well as other sleep disorders such as narcolepsy, or there's an actual diagnosis for a sleep terror disorder, where you are unaware that you are dreaming, and you may even have significant movement during your sleep. So what are the causes of sleep issues? Stress is the #1 cause of short-term sleep difficulties. And the primary causes of stress include school or job-related pressures, which a lot of us have been experiencing since the beginning of the pandemic. There's been an increase in workload in a lot of departments. There's hiring freezes. There's also the adjustment of working remotely, which can be really difficult for some people, depending on your work environment or your home environment for your work. Also, family or marriage problems increase a lot of sleep difficulties, and serious illness or death in a family can cause significant issues with sleep quality and the ability to fall asleep or stay asleep. And these are, of course, these three bullet points that I mentioned are really a big part of what we're all dealing with right now with this pandemic. And what the research shows is that after this stressor is gone, we can tend to go back to our regular sleep schedule and our sleep abilities, and that this can be temporary. But also research has been showing that the internet is one of the fastest growing threats to sleep, and that's not going away anytime soon. So it's really about learning strategies on how to manage and navigate some of the stimulus and just temptations that we have in engaging in some of these behaviors. So here are some of the behaviors that impact sleep. Drinking alcohol or beverages that have caffeine later in the afternoon or evening really impact sleep. A lot of people say, well, drinking alcohol relaxes me and helps me fall asleep. And that can be true. It can help you fall asleep, but your sleep ends up being disrupted at some point. Also, there is an impact if you exercise really close to bedtime. And also if you just follow an irregular morning and nighttime schedule. And so that's why when we are working from home and we may not have such a structured schedule, this can really impact sleep. And also just doing mentally intense activities right before bed. This can be anything from working late at night or watching the news or watching TV that's very emotionally intense. So we want to be mindful of what we do late in the evening. And I'll be talking in more detail later on of how to address that. So other factors can be our temperature that we sleep in. So if the room is too warm or too cold, that can really have a strong impact. Sound, this can be anything from loud neighbors to children to our partner snoring. So this can take many different forms. Lighting is important, not only when you are sleeping, but also the lighting prior to going to sleep really impacts our circadian rhythm. So I'll talk more about that later. Interruptions to our sleep, again, that can be noises, that can be many different things, that can be stress or worrying about the next day. So I'll be talking about ways to manage that. And then just practical, simple things such as the comfort and size of your bed. What research has been saying is that we should change our bed every 8 years, because then it loses its comfort and ability to support us. And then I spoke about a little bit earlier about habits of our sleep partners. So that can be snoring, that can be tossing and turning, lighting if they're reading in the evening and you're trying to sleep. So many different aspects there. So this is some of the issues that we can experience if we are having sleep debt. And so the University of North Texas says that there's a 10% increase in depression when we are not able to sleep well, and a 17% increase in anxiety when we're not able to sleep well. And this, of course, it is one that impacts the other. So if you're experiencing depression or anxiety, you're going to sleep less, and then vice versa. So it does create a vicious cycle that we want to address from both angles. And not sleeping well can increase irritability. It can decrease our productivity and our memory, because we're not, with our memory, it can really be impacted because, like I mentioned before, during REM sleep, we are consolidating short-term memory into long-term memory. So if we're not getting enough time in REM, then we're not able to remember as many things and take in as much information. It decreases our concentration. It makes it difficult to make decisions because we're a little bit more fuzzy in our thinking. It slows down our thought process and our ability to take in new information. And one of the studies that I read showed that our sleep tonight impacts our tomorrow, because they did a study on the people that slept well the night before, when given either good news or even bad news. They were able to handle it much better than the group that did not sleep well. And even the group that didn't sleep well, when they when they got good news, they were not as excited. It was not as pertinent as when you did sleep, or the participants did sleep much better the night before. So good to know. It really impacts our mood. Like I mentioned before, during REM sleep is when we are regulating our mood. So it really has a strong impact on the next day. So here are just some facts that you can all see different ways that sleep can impact us more than emotionally. There are more fatal crashes. 1 in 25 adults fall asleep at the wheel. So this is really big numbers and shows the impact of sleep. They say that it increases our exposure or susceptibility to diabetes or cancer. It ages us by 3 to 5 years. So thinking of all the impact that sleep can have, it can impact our weight, our blood pressure. So just a few statistics here for you to look over. And of course, we're going to talk about ways to manage this, so this doesn't look like very depressing news, but that there is hope and that we can address this as well. So I'm going to be talking about first some holistic approaches to improving our sleep. So these next slides will be talking about just some alternative approaches that maybe aren't as common. So this study actually was conducted during the pandemic. And this study showed that these 4 practices improve sleep, and that is self-compassion, mindfulness meditation, gratitude, and forgiveness. So definitely not practices that you may have heard of to specifically address sleep, but that can be really helpful. So I'll be going into more detail with each of these practices. So self-compassion just helps us be kinder to ourselves as we go through the challenges in life. It helps us recognize that our suffering is part of the common human experience, and it teaches us ways to send kind messages towards ourselves when we are suffering, rather than beating ourselves up or judging ourselves or criticizing ourselves for not doing as well as we would have liked, or for being imperfect. It really helps bring a sense of community and connecting to our common human experience when we are imperfect and when we recognize aspects of ourselves that we would like to see differently. So the research that was showed that some of the benefits include an increase in quality of sleep, and also less trouble falling asleep after a stressful day. And this is due to decrease in rumination and worry. And also the research showed that it improves our overall mood the next day, and that it increases our alertness upon awakening. So this slide is about practicing self-compassion. So all the underlined titles and words are links for practices. So I encourage you to do this on your own. And what a common phrase that, or comment that people make when I introduce self-compassion, is that they're very hard on themselves, and it's very hard to practice self-compassion. And I just want to talk about that this is a practice. It is something that we have to continuously do. It's not something that comes natural, especially if we've been very critical of ourselves for 30, 40, 50 years. This isn't going to just happen overnight. So it is about taking the first step of catching the critical voice and replacing that statement with something compassionate, like what would you tell a friend in a similar situation? There were some studies that were conducted during the pandemic, and they had participants write down compassion, or write a letter to themselves that was compassionate towards their mistakes, or to engage in a compassionate meditation. And this is after they really ruminated and actually even wrote down some of the mistakes that they did throughout the day. And after writing those mistakes, they either meditated through these self-compassion or using these self-compassion meditations, or wrote a self-compassionate letter to themselves. And the group that wrote these letters showed much better quality of sleep than the group that didn't. So it's really important to see, just after some of these practices, how this can really shift. So we can be very intentional on how to incorporate this into our everyday, and create a sort of ritual, or make this part of our regular schedule before we go to bed. There are also gestures that you can do, like just placing your hand on your heart can send messages to your brain of self-compassion. And placing your hand on your heart and even saying something as simple as, may I be kind to myself as I experience this struggle right now, or may I be kind to myself as I realize I made a mistake, can be really powerful, and only takes a few moments out of your day. So again, the first step is just catching that critical voice. So in this next slide, we're going to just take a moment and pause and begin to incorporate this right here, right now. Because if we are only compassionate towards others, the compassion is incomplete. So we're going to take a moment to really practice this and take that first step. So you can find any comfortable position, have your eyes open or closed, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And take a few moments just to get settled into your seat, and beginning to notice the natural inhale and the natural exhale. And we're going to take a moment to think about someone that you really care about, someone that only brings about positive feelings, and taking a moment to imagine them right here at the heart center. And if it's helpful for you to place your hand at your heart, you can do that. And as you imagine them here at the heart center, think about a time when they were struggling, or maybe a time when they were being hard on themselves for making a mistake. And take a moment to connect to that compassion and desire to take away their pain and suffering. And if you feel comfortable, you can mentally say, may you be free from suffering. May you be kind to yourself as you experience this pain. May you find peace. May you live with as much ease as possible. And then taking a few moments to include yourself now. Imagine yourself right here at the heart center. And if that's difficult for you to have compassion towards yourself, maybe imagine the child version of yourself. And imagine a recent struggle, maybe a mistake you made, maybe something that was imperfect. reminding yourself that you, just like this other loved one, are part of the human experience and are imperfect. That you, just like this other person, deserve compassion and empathy for those imperfections and those struggles. And then mentally saying, may we be free from suffering. May we be kind to ourselves as we experience this pain. May we find peace. May we live with as much ease as possible. And then taking a few moments to just notice your natural breath once again. And gently opening the eyes whenever you're ready. Knowing that this is a practice that you can try to incorporate into your nighttime routine. If you're ruminating about mistakes that you've made or things that were imperfect about the day, using this as a tool to help you with that, as it might get in the way of your sleep. We'll move on to the next slide, where we talk about mindfulness meditation as a way of improving our quality of sleep. So mindfulness meditation programs have shown that people fall asleep more easily, and that overall they're able to experience a better quality of sleep. There were some research studies that they did, and after practicing mindfulness meditation, people reported less rumination, less worry, and it sort of served as a buffer from over engaging with our negative thoughts. So mindfulness helps us recognize and accept negative thoughts and feelings. It's not about not having them. We have 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day. And we were born with something called the negative bias of the brain, where 80% of our thoughts tend to be more negative. So to fight this is actually making us engage with the thoughts much more than to radically accept this is part of what my brain does. And how do I now just change my relationship to these thoughts? And so by observing these thoughts and noticing as they come and as they go, and accepting that this is just part of what my brain does, rather than that there is truth and fact based on these thoughts, it creates space between me and the thought, and it reduces their intensity. So we're going to take a moment. On the next slide, I have just some practical ways that you can incorporate this. So in the study that they did, they specifically did body scans and mindful breathing. So these underlined titles are links to those practices. So we're going to just take a moment just to bring your hand onto your stomach. And this is just a simple practice that I like to do throughout the day. Every time I catch myself drifting, I say to myself, I notice myself inhaling. I notice myself exhaling. So let's just take a moment and notice that breath. Noticing yourself inhaling. Noticing yourself exhaling. So this is such a simple practice that you can do throughout the day when you're in meetings. If you catch yourself ruminating or being self-critical when you're trying to go to bed, another strategy that can help you decrease the intensity of the thoughts without having to get rid of the thoughts. So the other practice that this study showed to be beneficial was gratitude. So gratitude was actually one of the qualities that they showed improved sleep most of all. So they did a study where for 2 weeks, participants wrote down things and people that they were grateful for each day. And that just after 2 weeks, There was improved sleep quality, increased overall well-being and optimism, and reduced blood pressure. And of all of these things that they measured, they said that sleep quality was actually the one that had the biggest impact. So we're going to take a moment and pause and think about 3 things that you're really grateful for, and this can include people or things in your life. So take a moment, and if you feel like you want to share in the chat, I would love for that. And just take a few moments to pause and reflect. Now wait a few moments. If you want to, feel free to write those down in the chat or just jot them down for yourself to start this journal, get you on your way to applying some of these practices to improve your sleep. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Oh, yes, we do have someone responding. So they wrote, my job, my partner, and California. And I really agree with that. California, living in California during the pandemic has been something I've been really grateful for, because our weather has not been as something that holds us back from being outside and being able to maybe engage in ways that other people have not been able to. Other people are saying grateful for the walk I took this morning, for being vaccinated, and for the students in my class. Yes, lots to be grateful for. My close friends, nature, and my daughter. So thank you so much for sharing that. It helps us get into that frame of mind of thinking of what is working in our lives. There's definitely a lot that isn't working during this difficult time, but if we look hard enough, we will be able to find those things that really do make an impact. Someone else said, for the birds singing so charmingly in my backyard. Yes, nature is beautiful, and to really take the moment to slow down and acknowledge and notice that can be really powerful. So thank you for sharing all of that. On the next slide, we'll be talking about forgiveness. So definitely, I would say out of all the practices, I can say this one can be very difficult. And that this is something that research have shown that forgiveness is less about the other person, but more about ourselves. It's more about us forgiving another or a situation or something unjust in order to benefit our own well-being. So it's not about excusing or permitting something that's just cruel or that is really harmful. It's more about, how can I make sure that this horrific event isn't taking over my life? What power can I take back? So it helps us let go of grudges that decrease our personal well-being. And what research has shown is that people that tend to be more forgiving are more likely to sleep better at night than others. And that also those who are more self-forgiving sleep better because they're able to let go of those mistakes that they made more easily. And this is very similar to self-compassion. So it's having that compassion for ourselves, realizing we're human and that we are imperfect, and to hold ourselves to some standard of being perfect is just not going to happen. And so to constantly be disappointed can cause us more distress than to radically accept that we are imperfect and that we are still lovable regardless of that. What research showed was that forgiving someone can make us feel happier, more hopeful, less depressed, less anxious, and less vulnerable to stress. And that forgiveness overall improves our relationship with others. And so again, it's less about doing it for the other person, but more about us making peace with that so that it doesn't keep us up at night. How can we make peace with that? So this next slide talks a little bit about how to begin to even reflect on this practice. Just to begin considering forgiveness. And this isn't saying that we have to do it. So first thing is self-reflection and honesty. Let's start exactly where we are, recognizing that we've had an experience that was hurtful. And this is not about permitting or allowing this event to happen again. or that's saying that it's okay. It's about just reflecting where we are right now, and then to understand our own power in our reaction to it. And then further assess, what are we getting out of not forgiving? And in the long run, is it giving us the life we want? So these are just questions to see, is it worth it? Is it worth to forgive when we are in a situation that maybe is really difficult to? Also, further reflecting and understanding the impact of our ancestors and what has been passed down. And this, I mean, from different angles. So one is the messages around forgiveness, what has been passed down to us. Also, we may experience intergenerational trauma, and that is something that we hold within ourselves and our body and our psyche. And how can we take that into consideration when we're trying to forgive something that maybe goes generations beyond our own? So just things to consider. And always remembering this is your choice, your process, and not to judge, because we may not be ready, and that's okay. We may not feel it's necessary, and that's okay. It's just a moment to reflect to see, is it benefiting us? Is it helping us? And to really help us have ease with where we stand on the issue in this moment. That might change tomorrow or a year from now. So just some questions to help us reflect on that. Okay. So another aspect that we want to look at is stress. Like I mentioned before, stress is the number one cause of issues with sleep. So how do we help with stress when we live in a culture where we are socialized that we always need to be doing more? It is glamorized to be busy. It's glamorized to pull all-nighters. It's glamorized to say how hard we work. And I'm not saying we don't want to work hard, but can we change how we are working? This is ingrained into our American culture. And science has repeatedly shown that the average person can only focus on work tasks for short periods of at a time. And Dr. Devon Price shows that one task can, or about 3 to 4 hours is probably the max that we should spend on one task. And so if we are forcing ourselves to complete a task and to do all this for longer periods of time, it's actually not beneficial to us. It's actually not helping our productivity. And so just things to consider, as well as changing the culture. And this is a much bigger idea, but I do think it's really important for us to begin to question the concept of not producing enough. This is something that's ingrained in our society and is not beneficial. It doesn't actually make us more efficient. It actually makes us less efficient, makes us less happy, and it doesn't help us sustain the amount of work that we need to complete. And so the first step is to advocate for a society that encourages people to work less, but more efficiently. And this begins with not judging or criticizing ourselves or our coworkers for their productivity levels. How can we look at this from a different angle of how we work and what is most meaningful, and how can we prioritize our values so that we are overall happier, more optimistic, more energetic, more motivated, which is going to improve our work quality, which is key in a lot of this research. So something just to consider, as we know that stress is the one of the leading causes in sleep disturbance. So this next section is talking about sleep hygiene and providing simple tools to dig ourselves out of sleep debt. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. These are probably a little more common sleep hygiene tools that you've probably heard. So avoiding caffeine and alcohol in the afternoon, avoiding intense exercise and having meals later in the evening. And this is a hard one because I have everything going on, but trying to avoid the news or emotional or other emotionally charged activities in the evening. I know we want to be informed, but is there a better time to do this? Like maybe in the middle of the day, not first thing in the morning, but just in a time where it's not either going to impact the rest of our day or impact our sleep. Also avoiding naps. and avoiding hitting the snooze button, as hard as that might be, especially if we don't have a structured schedule. We want to work on that. So this next slide has some other tools. So as hard as it may be, we want to incorporate a daily routine. We want to create structure in our day by having each meal at the same time every single day. Also using natural light as a way to reset our circadian rhythm. So natural light really helps set that rhythm. So if we go outside first thing in the morning, or even wake up with the sunrise, that can really help reset our circadian rhythm. We also want to minimize exposure to blue light on devices. So they have shown that although all light affects our circadian rhythm, blue light impacts it significantly more. So this is on our devices, on our TVs, on our phones. So they do sell like these covers that you can put over to minimize and filter out the blue light, which can be really helpful. And in the evening, try to adjust the lighting, have the lights be dimmer, because it really does impact the secretion of melatonin. So we want to really make sure that we adjust that in our environment. So other things, I had mentioned temperature before. So ideally, we would like our room to be between 65 and 75 degrees when sleeping. And anything outside of this range impacts our sleep cycle. So just taking that into account. Using nighttime mode on our phone will help it not light up in the middle of the night, will help us not hear all the dings and reminders that can really affect our sleep. Also using things like a white noise machine can help us if we have a partner that snores, or if we have a loud apartment that we live in, many different things that this can help us with. So these next couple slides talk about retraining our brain. So we want to use bed for sleep and sex only. Lots of times we're in our bed on our phone, we're working, we're reading and watching TV. So this sends mixed messages to your brain. This says, in bed, I lie awake. In bed, I eat. I'm planning for my next day. That's what I do in bed. So your brain is active and associates your bed with being active. So we want to eliminate all of that and retrain our brain to associate the bed with just sleep or sex. We also want to maintain a regular sleep schedule, which can be difficult. So whether it's Monday, Friday, or Saturday, we want to make sure that we're going to bed at the same time every single evening and waking up the same time every morning. And the other piece that's really important is to only go to bed when we're sleepy. If you go to bed hoping that you will fall asleep, or you're just fatigued but not actually drowsy, you can just lie awake in bed and you can toss and turn in bed. And if you toss and turn for more than 20 minutes, I want you to get out of bed, because otherwise we are associating your bed with tossing and turning and frustration and trying to go to sleep and ruminating. So we want to shift that and retrain our brain to associate our bed with just sleep. And we don't want to get into bed until we're actually drowsy. And I'll talk about ways to get us into that state if it's not natural for you, if you're struggling with that. So we want to create a sleep time ritual. So something that you do every single day, whether it's in the evening if you shower at night, or just changing into your pajamas. We want to have one thing that we do every single night, and then that sets the rest of your schedule. From that point on, then everything you do is relaxing. You put relaxing music on. We practice one of the relaxation techniques. So we're going to be talking about that in a moment. And then I have one other slide here, just for those of you who maybe have limited areas of work, of where you can work in your home. Some people are working in their bedroom and have limited space. So I wanted to address that, because I know one of the recommendations is to minimize your bedroom and bed for work. So if we can't minimize and we have to do work in your bedroom, we want to create a very distinct separation between work and sleep. So definitely do not work in your bed, and follow all the sleep hygiene that we just spoke about. Rearrange your room, your furniture, so that there's a specific space just for work, even if you can put like a little divider of some sort so it feels very separate from your bed. Throughout the day, if you're working in your bedroom, take breaks in a different room, completely separate yourself from that. And then about 1 hour before bedtime, make sure all your screens are off, because again, that blue light can really impact your circadian rhythm. So those are just some tools for specifically for people that work in their bedroom. And this last slide here provides some relaxation techniques. These are all links for these practices, so you can listen to them on your own. Or you can also just read about it. Dive Reflex is not a video, but gives instructions on how to do it. So you can basically either get like a bowl of ice with water, or you can get like a Ziploc bag of ice cubes and then you dip it in water. You can place that over your eyes, take a deep inhale, and hold your breath as you dive your head forward and your head is below the heart. So if you have the bowl of water, you're just diving forward into that bowl of water. And this tricks your body into diving into ice cold water and reduces your the energy or the adrenaline that you might be experiencing if you're really anxious. So this activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is very much needed if you're wanting to slow things down and get you into a state of relaxation. For people that have low blood pressure, this is not a good technique for that. So be mindful of that. There's some contraindications. I also have a hyperlink for paced breathing, which is basically just exhaling longer than you inhale, so that you are activating that parasympathetic nervous system again. And then progressive muscle relaxation, you're just tensing and relaxing different muscles to again induce or activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So those are all practices that you can do on your own using those links. Also, sound has been linked to help with sleep. There are some research to show that those who listen to sound bowls, specifically this study used Tibetan sound bowls, helped reduce frustration, irritability, and induce more of a mindfulness state, and also overall wellness and optimism. So that's a link to a wonderful meditation using sound bowls. And then binaural beats are a wonderful tool that activate theta brain waves, which are needed when we are in our deeper aspects of relaxation. So this is a link to a YouTube video that has a binaural beat specific for sleep. There are binaural beats for everything. So there's a binaural beat for concentration and focus. So you can feel free to explore and you can do that on your own. And you want to just pause for a moment to see if there are any questions in the chat that either